So welcome, everyone. Bonjour à tout le monde. Welcome to today's webinar, Building Adaptation Skills for Young Professionals. So this webinar is the 6th of 7 that comprise the Building Adaptation Skills for a Changing Climate webinar series. Next slide, please. We set up this series to share experiences on how to build climate change adaptation skills. So you can see the 7 different webinars on this slide. So my name is Dominique Auger, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. I'm a policy analyst at Natural Resources Canada in the Climate Change Impacts and Adaptation Division. Avant de poursuivre, je tiens à souligner que je suis située dans la ville de Québec, où les territoires traditionnels et de traités de plusieurs Premières Nations se rencontrent, dont le territoire de la nation Huron-Wendat. I also recognize that we're all working in a different place, and therefore you may be working on another Indigenous territory, and I would encourage you to take a moment to reflect on that. So the webinar today is made possible with funding support from Natural Resource Canada through the Canada Climate Change Adaptation Platform and the Building Regional Adaptation Capacity and Expertise Program that we better know as BRACE. So BRACE was a 5-year program funded under the Pan-Canadian framework that wrapped up in March 2022. BRACE wrapped up in March 2022, and you have some information on the slide, additional information. The program funded 20 projects across several themes to increase capacity of organization, professionals, community, and businesses to adapt. So we'll add the link to the BRACE webpage and the BRACE in the chat, so you can find a list of the BRACE projects, and you can also look at some results on the webpage. So the webinar series features work done on the BRACE, but also under related initiatives. The first 2 webinars that took place back in September focused on building capacity for engineers and planners, while the third one looked at upskilling the workforce through cross-sectoral training and guided by competency frameworks and micro-credentials. The 4th webinar in the series focused on water management, and the most recent one that took place the last week focused on economic sectors throughout Canada, building a capacity in economic sectors. So the recordings of these webinars are available on the Climate Risk Institute webpage. So today you'll hear from speakers who focus their efforts on building capacity and skills through training programs for young professionals. Before we start, a few technical information. So Claire Sanders from the Climate Risk Institute is your technical support person for today, and she's available if you run into audio or technical issues. You can click on the chat box and find her in the name in the drop-down menu of participants and send her a direct message. Please note that your microphones have been automatically muted to avoid any audio distraction or feedback during the webinar. There will be a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar, but that doesn't mean that you have to hold your questions until then. So feel free to type your questions during the presentations in the Q&A box. And the chat box is also available if you'd like to submit comments. Notez que le webinaire d'aujourd'hui est en anglais seulement, mais les questions peuvent être posées en français sans problème. As I said, we are recording the webinar today, and we will be sending out a link to everyone who has registered, along with a copy of the presentation slides. So now, on behalf of everyone joining us today, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our 3 speakers, Russ Dwyer, Jasmine Farahbakhsh, and Justis Allard-Hagan. Also, Paula Gallo is joining us as a presenter. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Russ Dwyer, who will also talk about ClimateSense Program on the Prince Edward Island. So Russ is the Manager of Research Partnerships at the Canadian Centre for Climate Change and Adaptation, the CCCA. He manages the research portfolio of the Centre and UPI School of Climate Change. Russ also coordinates the provincial internship and climate training program ClimateSense, and he is the industry, community, and government liaison for the Canadian Centre for Climate Change and Adaptation. So Russ, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dominique. I'm sorry that was such a long introduction, everybody. I'll try and keep the slides a bit shorter and zippier. It's a pleasure to join you all today, and thank you very much for joining this webinar. We're coming to you today from the island of Abergwit in Mi'kma'ki territory, or Prince Edward Island. And we're here to talk about our BRACE-funded project, which we entitled ClimateSense. Joining me on the call today is Crystal Pike, who is the internal learning coordinator for the program. And Crystal will help out answering any questions in the chat box while we run through our presentation. So moving on to the next slide. Who are we and what did we do? Well, we were a group put together by pulled together through the BRACE funding provided by Natural Resources Canada. And it was a joint initiative between ourselves at the University of Prince Edward Island and the Province of Prince Edward Island's Climate Secretariat. So a joint project essentially between the three groups on this end. I wanted to start today first with a question, and it's a question we asked of ourselves and of islanders when we started this program. Moving on to the next slide. The question is, does your organization hesitate to take on climate adaptation projects, and why? We're a small island of around roughly about 160,000 people, and there is not a lot of human resources and scope to perform adaptation work here on the island in all sectors. So our question was, is your organization hesitating to take this on, and if so, why? Really, what we identified was a need for adaptation skills training for those who are already working in climate sectors and on adaptation work. And then there was a need to create a separate group, as it were, of skilled professionals who could go in and help organizations with their adaptation projects that were ongoing. I think what's really important to point out here is, for adaptation projects, there needs to be a proof of concept, right? We have to prove value, and we have to prove the legitimacy of adaptation for PEI through this program. So how we did that is we split the program. Well, the program had two essential arcs. It had a training and professional development program, and it had an internship program. So if we move on to the next slide, I'll just give you the brief highlights of the training and professional development program. So this program essentially was for existing professionals who were on the island working in adaptation and working in climate. And what we wanted to do was to build adaptation capacity in these groups through skills and training opportunities that we would offer to them. Now, initially, our original thought on these would be, it would be engineers, it would be architects, it would be planners. But what we found as we carried on with the training opportunities was that there were so many other sectors and skilled professionals and areas that we could affect if we offered training to professionals outside of that scope. So we looked at educators, we looked at the arts community, we looked at the Francophone Women's Association, we looked at students. And I think it was really important for us to broaden our horizon on what we think professionals are. And we were fortunate enough to have the support of NRCan in doing that. So how did we do this? Well, the training professional program, obviously during COVID, was offered online through courses and webinars, mini credentialing and things like that. And then when we were able to offer it in person here on Prince Edward Island, we did so. We did this not only through courses and works that we had developed, but by using courses and opportunities developed by other BRACE partners that were out there, such as the Climate Risk Institute, BCIT in Vancouver, and Simon Fraser University, and Royal Roads, who ran a really complex and interesting program for BRACE as well. So we're able to piggyback some of those courses to allow people to get a range of courses that we ourselves may not have been able to offer here in Prince Edward Island. So moving on to our second program, this was our internship program. And what was really great about this internship program was allowed us to take recent graduates from universities and colleges and put them in the field of adaptation, working on adaptation capacity building projects with organizations and host organizations. So we had 29 placements over the course of the BRACE project. So we had 17 individuals, 17 interns, and some of them did 2 placements, and working in 15 different organizations here on the island. Those organizations ranged from government departments through to Abergwit First Nations, through to Wind Energy Institute of Canada, and also Other interesting areas were creative PEI, the Action Femme, which is the Women's Acadian Women's Association. And what we found was moving and diversifying a bit out, we were able to as I say, touch a few more areas. So the projects that the interns worked on were developed prior to the start of the project, of the BRACE program, and the interns worked on these projects for either 6 months or a year within their department with a mentor, and their goal was to complete that work during the time. So why did we do this internship program, and why did we do this professional development? It really was for us to build adaptation capacity. And what does that look like? Well, if we flip to the next slide, these are some of the areas we tackled. We wanted to improve adaptation in government and infrastructure, largely related to coastal erosion, extreme weather, home flood protection. So courses we offered here were Intro to Climate Policy for climate professionals, asset management and climate resiliencies, project management courses for our interns and for our general viewers. And of course, we developed a course with the Waterloo Group on protecting PI homes from flood and erosion, which was a great free course we were able to offer. If we flip onto the next slide, just being aware of time here, we were looking at community and education too, another important sector. So looking at school curriculum engagement, community risks, and other areas in terms of education, such as drone pilot training. So what we did here was strategic dialogue, civic engagement courses. We had tours of the Lennox Island Mi'kmaq Cultural Center and community gardens. We did courses on unconscious bias with the BIPOC groups and the BIPOC organizations here on Prince Edward Island, with the idea of making sure that equity was being met in all of this. Moving to the next slide, we looked at resources. So what can we do in this area? Wind energy, forest adaptation, agriculture, as the slide says. So what did we offer here? We offered greenhouse gas inventory courses, measuring carbon footprint courses, climate modeling, forest adaptation, water, food security. Those kinds of courses were offered through to the interns and to the professional development courses. So it was really a wide range of courses. And the idea in that is, as I said at the start, we really wanted to hit as many areas or sectors of Prince Edward Island as we could. So moving on to the next slide, just in terms of the professional development, how did it go? Well, we had about 300 professionals from 150 organizations take the training. For us on Prince Edward Island, that's a huge deal. It may not sound like a huge deal in Ontario or other larger jurisdictions, but for us, to have 300 individuals or more than 300 individuals take that training was really important. And I think what's really important is that we managed to, as I say, touch 157 different organizations. That was huge for us. Organizations, Island Nature Trust, Parks Canada, the various PEI departments of government, infrastructure, municipalities, towns, engineering consultants, environmental consultants, all of these individuals were involved in those groups. The interns themselves had quite an intense training purpose, and they did about 17 hours a month. So with those 17 interns, we ended up having 2,853 hours of training, which is very significant. So moving on, I think, from what we have, our ability to accomplish the adaptation goals efficiently really was due to us being able to have a dedicated intern for certain projects, and really to build internal capacity within those organizations. And really what it has demonstrated for us is a need to fill these gaps permanently. An internship was a one-year program, and it's fantastic, but it doesn't fill the gap completely. So if we flip on to the next slide, a question for you guys is, what kind of intern adaptation project could build capacity within your organization, right? So a couple of examples. We had creative PEI. We're looking at arts engagement in the adaptation conversation, community engagement. Action Femme, we're looking at Francophone women. Do language and gender issues complicate adaptation projects and the implementation of them here on the island? The Abergwit First Nation project was really focused on community risks and, of course, potential. And the Department of Agriculture focused on, the future of foods. Should we be changing what we're farming? Should we be looking at, examining different pests? What does adaptation bring us? So something for you to think about and add to the Q&A there or the chats. I I'm going to move on just within the interests of time, if that's okay. So in terms of the interns, how did it go? I think it went great. 70% of those interns that we employed are now employed in jobs related to their particular project. So, for example, the intern at Wind Energy Institute didn't get a job at Wind Energy Institute, but got a job at an offshore wind energy institute in Texas. But 53% of them were offered positions immediately following the completion of their project, and 24% of those were hired directly into their host organizations, which for us is a massive coup here in Prince Edward Island. We have a problem with a brain drain. We have a problem with people leaving the island. And so for us to be able to keep young professionals here on the island and working in these climate adaptation projects was essential. And I think something for us that was really essential was, now that we've built the skills, how do we continue that forward? So if we look at the next slide, just in terms of lessons learned, what can I tell you? Well, you know, what's really important is that skills are great, but resources are essential, right? People can bring skills to the table, but if they don't have the resources to implement those, it is difficult. Mentoring, that's a skill, and some of our host organizations found that difficult. We found that internship length was crucial. Really, to get this done properly, we needed a year-long, not a 6-month-long internship. We just couldn't get there in time. But solution-oriented training was really, really important, and just simply, you know, informing people of what to do. Give them something that relates to where they are and what they're doing. So moving on to our last couple of slides. Better practices. What do we do next time? Well, we look at the time constraints. We look at creating more jobs and more resources and providing the mentors with better training too. And I think capacity is always going to be that issue. And I think, you know, the more interns we can get into these organizations, the larger the capacity building capacity will be, excuse the double word there. Finally, our last couple of slides here. Next steps, what are we doing now? Well, now that the BRACE funding is finished, we're moving on with the ClimateSense program. It's housed out of the Canadian Centre for Climate Change and Adaptation. And we have recently been announced in the PEI Climate Adaptation Plan that they will be renewing and funding for this program. They understand the value of it from the provincial government sector. So we will be looking for new training opportunities, new intern opportunities, and more public engagement. So in the interest of time, I'll finish off and just say thank you so much to everybody, but particularly to Natural Resources Canada for funding this program. You know, it was an incredible blessing to be able to work so closely with the province and with Natural Resources Canada, our federal partners, and being in a unique situation in Prince Edward Island where we're small and able to adapt quickly. We were able to make sure that this program delivered what we hoped it would, and more importantly, that this program will push forward now and continue to do this in the future. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ross, for this very interesting presentation and for sharing lessons learned and best practices. It's very informative. And if you have a chance, good comments also in the chat box, so you can take a few seconds to read them. Someone also mentioned a mentorship program, so that's pretty interesting. I haven't seen any clarification questions in the Q&A box, so we'll keep the other questions for at the end for the Q&A and after the 3 presentations. So now I'd like to introduce our next presenters. So we welcome Justis Allard-Hagan and Jasmine Farahbakhsh, who are both joining us from the University of Alberta Sustainability Council, and both have been involved in the Alberta Adaptation Resilience Training program, better known as ART program. So Jasmine has worked on a variety of academic, experiential, and outreach projects with the Sustainability Council since 2019. She coordinated the first 2 cohorts of the ART program alongside partners at the Government of Alberta and Associated Engineering. Justis has been involved with campus sustainability since 2014 and joined the Sustainability Council in 2021. He took over coordinating the ART program in July 2022. So over to you, Justis or Jasmine. I don't know who's starting the presentation.
Thank you very much, Dominique. Actually, it'll just be me presenting today, but Jasmine will join us for the Q&A. So yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. We're coming to you today from Edmonton on Treaty 6 territory. And over the last few days, I've had a little bit of internet connection issues. So let's really hope my connection stays stable here. But next slide. So I'll be talking to you today about the Adaptation Resilience Training, or ART program broadly, focusing on the internship aspect of the program. So ART has been a cost-shared initiative between the Government of Alberta and NRCan Brace, and is coordinated in partnership with us at the Sustainability Council at the University of Alberta. Previously, we were also partnered with Associated Engineering, although they have stepped back in their role as a program coordinator this year. Change slide. So the impetus of the program from the Government of Alberta was to deepen understanding of adaptation and its applicability across professions and industries, to build accountability within organizations, and to contribute to a cohort of adaptation professionals throughout the province. Change slide. So the development of this program was supported by working groups from 4 initial key sectors, which were identified as priority impact areas for the program, these being community planning, water management, agriculture, and infrastructure. And each sector was represented by a working group made up of representatives from the relevant Government of Alberta ministries and stakeholders from the province, or from across the province. Change slide. So we'll talk more about these sectors and the impacts of the program in a second, but first I just want to talk about the major initiative of the ART program we'll be discussing today, which is the internship component, and that's what we coordinate at the council. So these are 8-month work experience internship positions in which project assistants, or PAs, are placed with partner organizations to conduct work relevant to climate change adaptation. For the first 2 years, ART was open to recent graduates, and this year we've also opened it up to current students. And PAs in the ART program work with our project partners, but they're employed by the Sustainability Council, with the vast majority of funding received as part of the BRACE program being distributed to PAs in the form of wages. So PAs spend the majority of their time working with our project partners, but we reserve up to 20% of their hours to perform cohort-wide projects which support the larger goals of the Government of Alberta and BRACE. And so more on that in a little bit. So as part of their placement, there's also a final presentation event, and each PA generates a report, and recordings of these presentations, as well as many of the reports, are made available to the public on our website, the link to follow. And projects are accepted from most organizations across the province, and during the host recruitment phase, projects are assessed by their relevance to climate change adaptation, the scope of the project, value of the experience for the PA, availability of mentorship, and connection to one or more of the 4 key sectors previously mentioned. Change slide. So the ART program accomplishes the aforementioned overarching goals through 4 main objectives, those being that it develops the capacity of the next generation of adaptation professionals and serves as a bridge for students and recent graduates into the environmental field, supports young professionals through matching them to subject matter experts and access to workplace mentorship, provides recent graduates the opportunity to directly contribute to building adaptive capacity in Alberta, and supports organizations in the province who are working on projects related to climate change adaptation. Change slide. So the program supports adaptations in the province and other areas as well by generating and increasing access to the use of relevant climate data, contributed to mainstreaming adaptation in business planning and decision making, financing adaptation initiatives, and operationalizing adaptation tools and resources. Change slide. So the first ART cohort began work in September 2020, and the 3rd cohort is currently underway. Over these 3 years, including the projects we have currently ongoing, we've had 78 different projects, and each of these was unique with outcomes grounded in climate change adaptation, which either supported the host organization in their operations or supported the adaptation resilience of the community at large. And beyond this, as mentioned, PAs have also contributed to larger ART program goals. So more on that. Change slide. As previously mentioned, we reserved up to 20% of PA's hours for the work to be conducted on larger ART program goals beyond their work with their project hosts. So a main goal identified in the earliest stages of the program was the creation of the adaptation training sessions. That is training which was to be delivered publicly, which would focus on adaptation generally in the province and also specifically in 4 key sectors. So this initiative was led by Associated Engineering, and the primary contributors were the 4 working groups previously mentioned. However, PAs from the first cohort served as junior members of these working groups, and in that role contributed to the content of these training modules, which was then compiled and delivered by Associated Engineering with support from some topic experts in the Government of Alberta. In total, 8 modules were created, 4 foundational modules covering essential aspects of adaptation, and 4 topic-specific modules relevant to the 4 sectors previously discussed. And these modules were offered twice as a webinar-style training event, with the second ART cohort participated in September 2021, and recordings of these modules are available online at climatewest.ca/training-Alberta. Change slides. So the key result we're really focusing on today is the 78 projects we've been able to offer so far. And among these 78 projects, we've had PAs working with a variety of organizations, as you can see here. Change slides. So the main, a big key result for us, something that we love to see, is we've had a lot of returning hosts over these 3 years. So some major hosts have been the City of Edmonton, where PAs have contributed to research, communication, and strategic alignment of citywide adaptation strategies. Calgary, where PAs have contributed to community climate risk profiles, flood and drought resilient projects, and municipal food strategies. EPCOR, which is a major utility in Alberta, where PAs have contributed to numerous aspects of resilience in their provision of utilities, including drought preparedness, analyzing expected climate impacts on power distribution, and preserving urban stream and creek ecosystems. And other returning hosts have included the town of Okotoks, WaterSmart, Quest, Olds College, Williams Engineering Canada, Alexis Nakota Sioux Nation, and the Alberta Land Institute. Change slide. So of these 78 projects, obviously they have covered a wide variety of topics and adaptation initiatives, but I wanted to highlight 3 from the 2021-2022 cohort to showcase some of the diversity of the types of projects our PAs have worked on. So on the left there, a climate of resilience. This was a project that one of our PAs worked with the Municipal Climate Change Action Center, All One Sky, in the city of St. Albert, to create a municipal climate change action strategy. So many of our projects, especially with municipalities, utilities, and nonprofits, focus on these concrete adaptation strategies, attempting to touch on all relevant aspects to the host organization's operations. The middle project there, Agriculture Green Infrastructure, our PA worked with the Alberta Land Institute on a more research-oriented project, identifying the potential of nature-based green agriculture infrastructure in cities in Alberta by looking at 5 different case studies from other parts of the world. So some of our projects are a little bit more research-oriented, looking at specific adaptation strategies and building out the resources available in the province around these, especially nature-based solutions. And then in the third project, Reflecting Operations and Demands, the South Saskatchewan River Operations Model, our PA worked with WaterSmart to develop a collaborative hydrological model of the South Saskatchewan River Basin in order to foster collaborative water management among stakeholders and decision makers, and to inform future decision makers as climate change impacts the hydrology of the region. Change slides. So these are just 3 of our projects that our PAs have accomplished. There are 32 further additional reports available on our website covering a wide variety of topics and organizations, as well as recordings of many of the PA's final presentations. So you can access those on our website there at uab.ca/sustain. The URL is a little too long to link here, but if you visit there under Experiential Learning and then Adaptation Resilience Training and then completed internships, you'll find those. And more reports and presentations will be available in the early summer 2023 when the 3rd ART cohort completes its work. Change slides. So now we were encouraged to speak on best practices and lessons learned, but given that this is my first year with the program and only our 3rd year with coordinating this adaptation internship program, we hesitated to say that we've identified best practices necessarily, but I wanted to talk today a little bit about 3 or 4 key considerations, especially given that in my personal opinion, it's sort of hard to identify best practices when you're relating to something as urgent and complex and evolving as it relates to climate change. It feels like things change every year as we learn more and more and we involve more and more stakeholders. So I wanted to go this route of considering key considerations, but of course, Jasmine and I can speak to many aspects of coordinating the internship program, either in the Q&A afterwards, or my email will be available on the last slide, and you're always feel free to email me and we can talk about the nitty-gritty of coordinating a program like this specifically. But moving on to these key considerations, so next slide. Something that the council has used to create a lot of successful programming at the University of Alberta, and a strategy which actually informed our Sustainability Scholars Internship Program, which is another program we run, and actually one of the main reasons why we were approached to coordinate ART, because they're kind of similar from at least a back-end perspective, is this idea of connecting strengths or wants to wants. So this is a strategy that I always try to keep in mind. As we see it, there are 3 or maybe 4 major parties involved in this program. Those are students, hosts, us as coordinators, and then the funders. And each party has something they need and something they're able to give or provide relatively easily. So we have our students and recent graduates, and they want jobs. Many of them, and they want work experience as well. And many of them want environmental work experience. They're concerned about the climate crisis, but they want to be able to direct their careers in that direction. But those career paths are not always necessarily the clearest and most available, especially if they're not coming from a specific type of academic background. Then, of course, we have organizations who are either already working in climate change adaptation or who are recognizing the importance of their work and want to start prioritizing it in their strategic operations. They have work that needs doing, questions that need answering, and they can benefit from student expertise. And so we at the council find ourselves well positioned to connect these 2 groups in a few ways. So we're part of the university, so we're in touch with students who are just entering their professional lives. We're also able to access pathways and support for internship style employment opportunities as an organization of the university, which means that we can serve as an employer for shorter term contracts which suit this style of program. And we're also able to serve as an access to funding opportunities. And as the central coordinator for the program, we're able to expand the reach of the program, both to a greater diversity of hosts and also to a greater diversity of student applicants, and to provide projects which cover a wider array of adaptation issues, which is something I'll talk about in a second here. Next slide. So the second key consideration is defining adaptation, or considering adaptation, climate change work, however you want to approach this across different disciplines. And I see I'm really running low on time here, so I'll be real quick. Sustainability, we're called the Sustainability Council, but that's obviously not always the most preferred term, and terminology can really be a challenge. So for both in both professional and academic worlds, which are defined by disciplinary boundaries. So in terms of this program, this especially presented a difficulty when approaching hosts and helping them to define their projects, whether that be because they had mitigation projects that they wanted to accomplish, or because they didn't see their work as relevant to adaptation. So what we really tried to emphasize is 3 different key considerations, especially across that adaptation mitigation binary. The first being that adaptation involves a strategic approach, looking at where we're currently at now and where we need to be, taking into account expected climate impacts. The second being outcomes beyond greenhouse gas emissions. And the third being that outcomes may come from communities and that their work impacts, and especially emphasize aspects of resilience. Change slides. Change slides again. Yeah, I'm going to rush through here a little bit. I see I'm already over 12 minutes. This is just our last consideration here then. I already touched a little bit on the disciplinary aspect of the challenges of this program. But the last thing, and this was something that Ross mentioned, is fostering mentorship we found was really key, especially as I'd mentioned, because students are wanting to enter the environmental discipline. They're wanting to move into that field, but the environmental field in itself can be kind of nebulous. It can be argued whether it even necessarily really exists, given that the issue of climate change is impacted by and impacts every aspect of our lives. And so it's sort of ever expanding in a sense. And so the career paths aren't always well defined, and students from a wide variety of disciplines see the relevance of their background and their experience to these issues, but can't necessarily access that career path, that mentorship that other, more defined disciplines have. And so professional mentorship is really key in that regard. And this organization, or pardon me, this the ART program offers a great opportunity to provide that mentorship, but fostering that mentorship can be a challenge with us as central coordinators, because we're working with 25, 30 plus different host organizations. We're not necessarily have the time to build those key expectations individually with each host. And so when we're going through this and trying to build out this expectation for mentorship, we found that the best that we are able to do is to provide a lot of time, especially during the host application period and the student application period, to work with these hosts, to set clear expectations, to work with them and discuss topics around mentorship and the importance of these of providing mentorship to students and the value that this provides to students, and then also to maintain open and clear communication with all participants as part of the program. And let's just go to the next slide. This is my last slide, and I'm over time now. So we'll take questions towards the end, I suppose. But you can see my email there, justis@ualberta.ca, justis@ualberta.ca. If you have any other questions, feel free to send me an email, and I'm happy to talk with anybody about the program further. And thank you very much for coordinating this event today.
Thank you very much, Justis, and very interesting and very exciting to know that there's a third cohort in place, and very positive comments in the chat as well. And just to mention again that the presentation will also be sent after, and your contact details are on the slide if you're interested in contacting Justis directly. So considering the time, we'll move now to our final presenter, Paula Gallo, who will speak to us about the work done through the Learning for a Sustainable Future organization. So a few words on Paula. She specializes in participatory design and engagement with children and youth, with a commitment to building sustainable and inclusive communities. She works with diverse stakeholders and multi-generational communities across Canada, designing innovative engagement experiences and child-friendly outdoor spaces, including school grounds, parks, and childcare centers through her consultancy, Recreate Place. So Paula, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Those were fantastic presentations from Ross and Justis. It's so exciting to see these amazing approaches and important reflections on building capacity with young climate professionals. The program I will be sharing takes us back to starting a little bit even earlier in secondary school, when young people are thinking about their next steps. And I'm speaking to you from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. So glad to be here. You can go to the next slide. So this program, Green Jobs, Adapting to Our Changing Climate, was delivered in collaboration with Learning for a Sustainable Future. So they're a national charitable organization. They've been around for 30 years, and they do some amazing work integrating the principles of sustainable development into the education system. They host professional development workshops and webinars for teachers and youth forums across Canada. Used to be all in person. Most of it tends to be virtual now. And it's really engaging students in important conversations and action projects. So it was great that they got brought into this project because they have this incredible reach and do really important work. Next slide. So that's just me and a link to the consultancy that I work with. So LSF brought me in to work on this because I have this approach for engaging youth and children in important conversations. So, and this was an important conversation that they were engaging in with climate change experts across Canada. Next slide. So the objective of this project was to support high school students as they prepare for the 21st century workforce, building their knowledge around potential jobs available in climate change adaptation. And the approaches that they were looking at were in agriculture and community health, infrastructure, planning, natural resources, tourism, traditional knowledge, water, and nature-based infrastructure. And it engaged 9 teachers. There were 18 student interviewers. So each of them connected with their classes, and many of them also connected with the whole school after this project and shared this information. So the numbers could be quite a bit higher there. And the recordings have been shared with thousands of students and teachers across Canada. So this is an ongoing project, and it will live on with LSF through all of this amazing programming and work that they continue to do. Next slide, please. So this is what's on the LSF website, and you can see the videos all there on the right, and the whole series creating these videos, which happened fairly quickly. It really got going last January, and they were all complete by the end of March. So it was designed to be integrated into a variety of secondary subjects, careers, guidance, green industries, science. But, you know, a creative teacher can do a lot more than just focus on these areas. And it was designed so students could imagine themselves tackling climate change adaptation throughout their entire lives. All of us can integrate this approach into any career. And that was really one of the underlying messages in this video series. For example, we had tourism experts who were also actively engaged in addressing climate change through professional associations. And we had a beekeeper in Newfoundland, that's the tourism video, who's diversified his business year-round to address weather patterns and identifying new opportunities to engage with different groups of tourists. So it's really trying to be wide-ranging. And the videos are all about 10 minutes long, and they include an introduction from the school, from the students about what they're already doing in the area and how this connects to their local realities. Next slide. And so what's great about this series is that so many of the experts who've already spoken were also involved in this webinar series this fall. That's Serge Dupuis and Joe Durayo, David Pearson, Doug Johnson, and Ross Dwyer today. So yeah, all our VIPs. Next slide. So this concern, as we've all heard so much about over the last few years around climate anxiety, was actually a big part for the teachers kind of getting involved in this program. They see this with their students, they experience it themselves. They're often unsure of how to tackle such big issues in their classrooms. You know, some of the teachers that we worked with, you know, one of them was a math teacher. So they were very open to bringing this into the conversation, but it wasn't necessarily part of their curriculum. And they saw this project as a concrete way to engage their students in something really positive, and that then these learnings could go out and be taken out to all their fellow classmates in the entire school. So teachers were able to integrate this work across a variety of subject areas, and there's many connections to curriculum. But one of the, you know, the lessons learned that I note later is it would be so great to be able to expand it even more and, you know, go into English and art and different topic areas. So yeah, so that's great. So next slide. So this project helped build the skills and confidence of all the students involved. They were so nervous at the start, so many of them, about reaching out to the experts and having a conversation with them. So layered on with the climate anxiety was also the anxiety about just doing cold calls. And so they found it incredibly useful, and they build all these skills, and they saw the power of this. And so they learned, you know, that just kind of really practical set of skills, and also expanded their understanding about climate change adaptation in general. So the students watching these videos, and they're being shared with thousands of students, see that young people have a role to play in our climate future, which is powerful. Next slide, please. So there were a number of resources created to support the video creation and kind of lead up to that. So there was a lot around helping the teachers, creating toolkits, and there was workshops. And then we brought the students in, and they went through their own toolkit, went through a number of interview prep workshops. And actually what's also amazing is that there was a set of learning resources created for younger ones from kindergarten to grade 6. So it's really like, if we're looking at creating a whole generation of climate adaptation experts, or people who care about climate change challenges, we have to start early. Next slide, please. So this was a shot of our Zoom interview training with the students and the teachers. We did a few of these because it's just, you know, quite a logistical exercise to do this with classrooms. And with our amazing videographer, Sierra Scher. She was great. She was coming in from Quebec and really set the students up for success. Next slide. So this is just a shot of, you know, the toolkits that we created, and they gave kind of a rough overview of climate change adaptation at the start. Lots of activities that the teachers could take the students through in class on their own. Lots of practice opportunities and background for conducting the interviews and helping the students plan out their time. So it's a bit of like project planning also. Next slide. And these were the resources that were created for the younger students. Really kind of age appropriate, important conversations, and setting students up for the future. and helping them think about how they can tackle climate change through adaptation and mitigation as they grow. Next slide. So this is Salma and Jack. They're two amazing students, grade 12 students last year from Don Mills Collegiate in Toronto. They've since moved on. Salma's at doing environmental design at OCAD-U, and Jack is at Trent in conservation. And they interviewed Mark Neelitz, who's the Director of Operations and Adaptive Management in ESSA in Vancouver, and Sarah O'Rourke, who is a GIS technology at CBCL. We're just going to see this video for a very short minute so that you can get a sense of what the students did, just to kind of make it real.
So all of that gets tied into most of our projects.
So Mark, climate change adaptation and infrastructure is kind of a mouthful. Can you tell us how the two are connected and maybe explain what infrastructure is exactly?
The infrastructure, at least the work that I'm involved in, again, with more of an ecology background, increasingly that work around infrastructure has been expanded to think about natural infrastructure and green infrastructure. So not just those like concrete engineered civil engineering types of projects that people might often think about, but increasingly, how do we use the natural environment and we can engineer some of that natural environment to help address some of the impacts of climate change and mitigate and adapt to those things. As I've learned and worked more in adaptation, I've realized that adaptation, a lot of the primary impacts of climate change are stemming from impacts.
Thank you. That's great. That's perfect. So that's just a small little clip, but it just gives you a sense of, these big conversations, and the students were prepared, they were ready for this, and then they were sharing it. So that was great. So these are some comments from two of the students about how rewarding this experience was. And I think they're teachers on this call today, Lisa Jeffries, so which is fantastic. And what I love about these is they're kind of, they run the gamut of this experience of kind of coming in, not knowing much about it, becoming more confident, and then from CJ, really starting to attend municipal council meetings and understanding what land use planning is. So these students were not sure how planning connected to climate change adaptation. So they worked really hard to create a video that then allows people to understand what those connections are, young people. Next slide. So this is a lot of the outreach that LSF has done. Lots of connections. All of these youth forums were all done this fall. So that's a lot of students in a very small amount of time that have been reached and these videos have been shared with. Next slide. So I've of course shared too many, best practices and lessons learned. It's hard to call them down, but everybody had such nuanced responses to this. So, it was hard to kind of pull some things out. But one of the big things was that it really allowed these students to understand you don't need to be a scientist to be involved in climate change adaptation. And so that was hugely beneficial. And so one of the things that I think would have been great is more connection with the experts, because it was such a small amount of time that we were working with them, and they were so excited about meeting the experts and so much looking forward to it. And so I think they were nervous when they came to that, that interview, and they hadn't actually chatted with them before. So that's one of the big things. And I think also local connections, really to have local subject matter experts. So have this connection. So, because everything they say about climate change, everything all the research shows is having that local connection helps make it real. So those were just a few of the things. Next slide. This is where LSF's going next, continuing, sharing through social media, sharing resources, doing presentations across Canada with all of these diverse partners. They have an incredible reach with all of these groups. So this project will continue to reach out into the educational world over the years. So last slide, just wanted to say thanks so much to Natural Resources Canada for understanding the importance of extending this important project to high school students. you know, it was a great experience for all of them, and they had fun.
Thank you very much, Paula. And it's very interesting because I don't know if you saw the chat, but Jasmine mentioned that one of the experts on your list is a past project assistant from the art program. So
That's
really
fantastic. I saw that pop up, but I didn't have time to kind of go in. Yeah, that's great.
So that's very interesting. Thank you very much. And just quickly to mention that Learning for Sustainable Future also released a few days ago the results of their climate change survey, assessing Canadians' knowledge, understanding, and perception of climate change and its risk, and also looking at views on climate change education in Canada. So that's something, if you want to look at their webpage, I think Kate can put the link in the chat, but that's a good document to look at also in terms of climate change education. So thank you, Paula. Thanks to all the three fantastic presenters. We now have, 9 minutes left for Q&A. So I would welcome Russ, Justis, and Jasmine back on put their camera back on. And again, if we're not able, well, we might not be able to get to all questions today, but we'll follow up by email, and we'll provide answers by email as well. So maybe first question here for following Paula's presentation. So would you recommend the resources from climatelearning.ca for older youth, example, 18 to 30 years old?
I think resources that are, even when they're created for younger children, are always very adaptable. And I said that. I think it's, you know, they're great. They're very cross-curricular, and there's lots of activities in there. I mean, I think we all can use reminders and a grounding in climate conversation. So yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Maybe Russ and Jasmine and Justis, maybe I have a question on your internship program. So do you see an increased demand for this kind of internship program? So I know in Alberta, you are at the third cohort, and what about PEI and across Canada? I mean, do you see a demand for this kind of, an increased demand for this kind of program? Russ, I see that you
from PEI end, absolutely, yes. So I believe it was maybe 4 or 5 days after the first or second cohort had finished, we had 3 or 4 calls. Can I get one of those? Where do I find an intern? You know, from completely different areas that we hadn't touched in our last area. This was from the Department of Health, looking at climate anxiety, and they wanted an intern to be working on that. Department of Fisheries was in touch with us as well. So I think there is, because the brand is out there now, and because we have had such success with those interns, and because PEI is so small and everybody knows everybody, we're lucky that we're able to have this. So we have a long list of people waiting for interns. We've just got to get to that next place where we can move forward with it.
Great. Justis.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Jasmine can speak to the first 2 years, but having taken over from her amazing work in getting the program out there over those first 2 years, I can say that taking over in July 2022, we already had a significant demand. I would say that our main limitation, honestly, is, you know, who can we reach out to? Because almost everybody we reach out to is interested. You know, like once people hear about the program, if they hear about it and they have the capacity to create that project, there is a significant amount of interest. And we're finding, especially what's been striking for me, is across different industries, across different sectors, we're seeing people, you know, we have the flexibility as part of this program to take many different types of projects and internships. And so, you know, it's not just the environmentally focused nonprofits, it's, you know, construction companies, it's, you know, consulting companies and urban planning organizations and things like that. So yeah, we've definitely seen a lot of interest, and it's only growing.
I can just weigh in very briefly. I agree with what Justis has said about the program, but I mean, you'll just mention that I've seen the demand on both sides of host organizations who are looking to get involved, and they see what a great opportunity this is to increase their capacity, but also from young professionals and even mature professionals who are really eager to get into the field. And one of our limitations early on was that it was restricted to recent grads within a particular time frame from Alberta. So we got a lot of interest from other provinces or people who graduated outside. And so it's really exciting that we've expanded that a little bit to include current students. And so, yeah, hoping that that kind of sets the trajectory for lots of folks. But I saw someone in the chat ask if they're eligible being from Nigeria. And I think it's right now, I think only from Alberta. So it's a little bit narrow still.
Great, very exciting that there is a high demand and a broad demand as well from different fields. There was a question in the Q&A that Crystal from UPI, she provided an answer, but I think Paula, you might want to add to it. How could Canadian secondary school teachers better prepare their students for green jobs of the future? There seems to be a disconnect between the green jobs that exist or soon will exist and the post-secondary programs our students pursue. So I know, Paula, you mentioned a few resources during your presentation, but you might want to.
So sorry, is it just asking about resources or?
No,
or just
how
kind of
could
approaches?
teachers better prepare their students?
Yeah. Well, a lot of what LSF does and a lot of the work, what the research shows is that teachers need to feel more confident talking about this with their students. So I think there's a lot around professional development. And, you know, you can go right back, you know, this should probably be starting at the Faculty of Education, and it should be something that all the school boards are taking on. And there's so much work that needs to be done to help teachers just bring this into the classroom. And I think also kind of this, you know, cross-disciplinary approach so that it's not just all this weight landing on the science and the geography teachers. It needs to be all teachers understanding how this impacts, you know, them personally, their students. So that's a lot of personal work that needs to be done at the educator level, right? So they need to understand why this is important, or, you know, how they can bring it into the classroom. It's complex. I mean, this is big, big, big stuff. And I think it's just, you know, starting to have these conversations on a regular basis. And I think the key is doing something, right? It's actually just taking baby steps, and doing a project can just bring so much learning to everybody, including the teachers.
Thanks, Paula. And Crystal, I don't know if you want to add to your answer in the Q&A, but I think it's linked to what Paula already mentioned.
Yeah, we found it was particularly hard to try to get into the curriculum. Here on PEI, the only place that climate change even comes up is in an elective, that is the grade 11 or 12 elective for environmental science. But it can fit into anywhere, whether it's math or language or phys ed about extreme heat and nutrition, or social studies about impacts. Like, there's so many places it can fit. We had an intern that was with the Department of Education, but they were, again, kind of slotted into like grade 8 heat, where we could talk about climate sense and heat exchange and how the greenhouse effect works, but that doesn't address the social impacts or how you feel or the existential crisis that kind of is caused when kids try to ask that question. No one has an answer. Yeah.
And Ingrid mentioned civics courses. Absolutely. You know, but I think that's just one little piece. I think it should just be like networked out through the whole system.
Well, thank you very much. I feel we could go on and on discussing this, but it's already almost 2. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, including, of course, our presenters. So we included a few references here on the slide. And on the next slide, also, you'll see that there's a link to the evaluation form. So we'll add the link to the chat, and it will also be included in the copy of the slides that you will receive post-webinar. So, of course, we welcome any comments that would help us to improve our upcoming webinars. So the next one, the next webinar in this series will focus on building adaptation capacity for Indigenous communities. It will be held early in 2023. And registration information will be shared when a date has been confirmed. So on that note, again, I would like to thank you all. Merci à tous. Thank you to the presenters. I'll leave you for the afternoon. I hope you have a nice day and hope to see you soon. Thank you, everyone.